Can the mysterious giant wolf control the beast inside? What will her and her mate's future be like? What kind of crisis will the new character bring? Dive into the world of genetically modified werewolves. Subscribe. Chapter 21 Part LL. A couple of days had passed since the lichen incident. Finally 9 was part of the pack after completing the ritual without disruptions. She still did not know that she was a Luna, but Lillian was slowly introduced her to the roles of a Luna, and in time Slade would tell her, but not just yet. Other things were on Slade's mind. He noticed his mate becoming agitated. He would see 9 twitch, or clench her fists, also shutting her eyes and taking deep breaths. He was becoming very concerned even though she brushed him off when he asked if she was okay. He spoke to Dexter, who also noticed that signs and thought it might have been the beast. The both concluded that it was best for 9 to release her built-up energy, to tire her out, and the only thing they could think of was fighting. But the problem was, could they keep 9 from killing? "It's worth a shot," Ryan said with a shrug. Slade nodded thoughtfully before looking at Nolan for his answer. "Well, I think we are all gonna die," he said bluntly. Slade sighed and leaned back in his office chair. He rubbed his tired eyes and stretched out his feet, ignoring the loud smack and the grumble that followed from his friends. "Okay." He crossed his arms. "I think we should do as Ryan says and give it a try. We'll have 9 teach the younger pups, that way they seem less threatening." The guys nodded and he continued. "But we are all going to have to keep our guards up. We cannot let her slip for even a second," Slade said seriously, looking at both of them intensely. They both nodded. "Very well, when do we begin?" Nolan asked. "Now?" Slade replied and stood up, along with Ryan. He glared at Nolan, who cursed under his breath. "I mean we could start tomorrow when I'm not here." He sheepishly pleaded and yelped when Ryan hit the back of his head. Slade chuckled and moved towards the door and out the house, with the guys following behind him. Using the mark, Slade knew where 9 was. Coincidentally, she was actually at the training grounds. Though it was a bit worrisome. She must have a reason for being there, otherwise she would have stayed with the women or children. The guys jogged to the training grounds where new and experienced members of the pack were training in both human and wolf form. Each group was separated according to experience and strengths. Slade took a sweep of the wide land and spotted 9 sitting by the bordering tree line. He didn't like the way her eyes were locked onto some of the experienced warriors. They too could feel her gaze, putting them on edge as shown by their cautious sparring. It was like they didn't know who the opponent was, the wolf before them or the Luna watching them intensely. "Go help the young ones and explain to them about our plan," Slade ordered his Beta and Omega, before moving to his mate. When he reached 9, he was on guard. Slade's instincts were subconsciously acting upon the unknown threat coming from 9, even though she was doing nothing. "Sorry." She immediately apologized when she noticed his sudden stiff behavior. She remained seated because she was less threatening than she was standing. "It's okay," Slade reassured as he tried to release some of the tension in his muscles. He took a seat next to his mate and then pulled her onto his lap, to sit sidewards. He wrapped his arms around her waist and sighed contentedly when she snuggled against him. Just like that, the tense atmosphere evaporated, setting a calm feeling over everyone. "Better?" Slade mumbled and kissed her temple. "Yeah." 9 purred and laid a soft kiss on his neck, right on the mark. Slade growled and then flipped her onto the ground. He laced his elbows on the side of her head and covered her body with his. Slade attacked 9's face with multiple kisses, but making sure not to kiss her lips. He held in a chuckle when his mate scrunched up her face and let out a growl of frustration. He pulled back and his lips curled into a wolfish grin when 9 cutely pouted. "Why won't you kiss me?" she asked softly. With her pout and her pupils expanding, Slade thought that Nine easily put Puss in Boots to shame when it came to being adorable. Eyes softening for his mate, Slade kissed her nose. "Why don't you kiss me?" he retorted and smirked when Nine opened her mouth and then closed it. "Oh?" she finally said with a couple of blinks and then locked onto his lips, grabbed his face and then smashed hers to his. The kiss got heated quickly, but Slade forced himself to slow it down. Although that didn't stop the sinful thoughts of releasing both their energies in a different way. Pulling back, Slade pecked her plump, red lips and stood up, pulling his mate with him. "Come on, I'm going to teach you how to train with the younger wolves. Hopefully the exercise will drain all your pent-up energy," he told her and intertwined their hands. Nine looked down in shame, her eyes trailing to their feet as they walked to the younger members. "You noticed that too, huh?" she mumbled. She tried hard to hide her sudden restless behavior, wanting to fix it herself and not burden her mate. It was easy to tell that since the lichen fight, the beast desired more. He wanted to kill, hungered after fresh blood and the sound of vulnerable calls of pain. He lived for the thrill of the hunt. It was almost scary to hear his thoughts flitter into hers. At least now, Nine was strong enough to tell which thoughts were hers and which were his. But other than that, she will always be weaker than the beast. She couldn't take the beast for granted when he could easily push through, but instead opted to tease and mock her with his power and strength, proving to her that at any moment he wanted, he would take control. But that was a problem for another day. For now she just needed to find a way to distract him, or dull his senses. Too bad she didn't have wolfsbane. "I always watch you, Nine, even when you don't notice my gaze," Slade confessed with a sheepish expression. "It's hard to keep my eyes off you," he said, eyes softening as he peered down at her. The mates smiled at each other, both suddenly seeming shy to hold each other's gaze for long. They reached Nolan, who was standing to the side, critiquing and shouting the young pups as they did a warm-up routine. His nose was high in the air, and lips curled into a superior smirk, as he thrived on all the groans and whines coming from the young wolves. Slade stopped right next to Nolan and shot him a glare that made him flinch. "What are you doing?" Nolan chuckled nervously and swung his arms to the side. "Oh, you know. Nothing," he replied with a shrug. Rolling his eyes, Slade scanned the area and spotted Ryan jogging towards them. He narrowed his eyes behind his beater at the warriors who patrolled the borders. Ryan reached them and said, "The patrolling wolves spotted some rogue activity really close to our borders. I sent out extra warriors just in case." Slade nodded his head in agreement. "Good, keep an eye out, especially at the north side. We can't let another incident happen again," he said, subtly referring to the lichen. The beater nodded his head and then turned to Nolan. "Did you brief the pups about Nine like I told you to?" The look on Nolan's shocked face said it all. But of course, he decided to dig his own grave, like always. "What art?" "Of course I did." "Phut." He waved his hand dismissively, nervous eyes darting to his alpha and beta who glared at him. He spotted a wide-eyed Nine, who waved at him with a smile. Nolan waved back enthusiastically, but flinched when Slade let out a low growl. "Right. I'll go round up the pups," he exclaimed and immediately ran to the group where he called for a huddle. "Is he going to be?" Ryan asked with a straight face. "Oh, yeah," Slade replied. Nine watched with interest as the two face each other and smirked knowingly. She suddenly felt sorry for Nolan. Clearly something bad was coming his way. Once Nolan returned, exuding excitement and happiness to compensate for his arrogant behavior. The pups, though, did not share the same enthusiasm. Instead, they looked truly scared. Some were pale and looked ready to faint while others hid behind another. Slade took note of it and wasn't surprised at their response. Anyone going up against his queen after she defeated a lichen single-handedly should be frightened. He rubbed the back of his head and frowned. He hoped he wouldn't be scarring them though. But then again, a few scares never hurt anyone. All right, listen up. Slade's loud, commanding voice rang out. All eyes and ears were on him as he paced in front of the group. His posture screamed alpha. With his head held high, chest puffed and shoulders back. Not to mention the powerful aura coming from his paws. Slade could not go easy on the pups. There was a time and place where he would relax and joke around, but it was not now. I'm sure Omega Nolan has informed you about my mate helping you to train, he said, and watched as some gulped and others trembled. One of the younger she-wolves raised her hand. Yes. He nodded towards her. Are we being punished? She asked hesitantly. Others nodded their head furiously in agreement. Slade had to laugh at that. But it was not a humorous laugh, but a cold, dry chuckle. Should there be a reason why you think this is a punishment? He asked, almost too calmly. Simultaneously, everyone in the group shook their heads. It was almost comical to watch. Well then, now that's settled. Slade wickedly grinned and then turned to his mate, where his eyes slightly softened at her happy face, clearly not affected by his dominant side. 9, please shift. Blinking at him, 9 reached for the hem of her top and lifted it up to show her torso when abruptly her mate roared. She paused in her action and watched as everyone, even the warriors behind her, suddenly turned their backs to her with their heads bowed. All faced away from her except her mate, who strode towards her with a clearly unhappy face. 9 was caught off guard when her mate wrapped one arm around her bare waist, pulling her toward him, and his other hand lifted her chin up so she could look him in his black eyes. I'd appreciate it if you didn't show off your body to other males. He growled out the words, sounding so stiff and tense. An unnatural feeling fell upon 9, as she let go of her top and wrapped her arms around his neck. She pulled him close and gently smiled. Okay. She whispered and gave him a peck on his nose, just the way he does to her. She watched as Slade's eyes slowly glowed to an emerald green shade. They shone brightly as they gazed upon her with tenderness. Good, he said with a nod and a grin, running his fingertips across her spine, sending a pleasurable chill down her back. They stayed there for a couple of minutes, just staring at each other. 9 blinking up at him and Slade grinning down at her. But of course, Nolan loves digging his grave even deeper. Are you done yet? I'm getting bored of looking at Ryan's head. I think he has a bald patch. Everyone snickered as Ryan growled, but could not turn to hit Nolan, who was poking his head. Rolling his eyes, Slade let 9 go and turned around to give her privacy as she shifted. It didn't take long and everyone knew when she shifted. It wasn't because of the sound of bones cracking, or the ground shaking beneath their feet, but the dangerous air that emanates from her. 9 went to stand next to Slade, towering over all of them as her mate addressed the group. All right, who wants to spar with 9? All eyes looked away, heads peered down and bodies suddenly disappeared behind another person. It didn't help that 9 was intensely staring at everyone with those black slits. Amused by everyone, but didn't show it, Slade looked to Ryan, who gave a knowing smirk. Nolan. Slade barked out, spotting his hidden figure behind Ryan. And just like a wonderful best friend, the beater moved out of the way and exposed a nervously frightened Nolan. Oh, hey Alpha. The Omega took a couple steps forward. I just wanted to tell you that I volunteer, as tribute, to go on patrolling duty. He gave a thumbs up with a shaky grin. Slade raised a brow, but his face remained blank. Okay, great. Thanks. I'll be on my way. He chuckled lightly and twisted on his feet and headed straight for the woods. Nolan. Slade called out low and deep, lacing his name with authority that he cannot refuse. Nolan twisted again on his feet to face Slade. Yes, Alpha. He faked a cheery voice to mask his nervousness. Slade smirked deviously and crossed his arms. Why don't you show these pups how it's done? Nolan scoffed lightly and waved his hand. You are too kind in choosing me, but I think Ryan would be more of a match, or even you. Oh mighty Alpha. He said and bowed low. Nonsense, I have a mate so I can't die. Ryan replied. The young ones watched in amusement at the squabble between Beta and Omega. All used to their bickering and used the mind link to place bets on who would win. Clearly all went for Ryan. Well, what about me? Nolan cried. Ryan looked at his pleading friend. I'll make sure there are hot girls at your funeral. That made Nolan pause in his mentally prepared speech. Shutting his mouth, he shuffled closer to Ryan and mumbled under his breath, make sure they wear red lingerie. He then coughed awkwardly and then moved away from the others. He shifted into his grey and white wolf, and puffed up his chest and lifted his head before confidently walking up to 9. The difference between the two was as clear as Nolan's fear. 9 easily towered over him while Nolan, even with his head tilted way up, only reached just below her shoulders. Through the link Nolan said with false bravado, bring it on. Don't bring it. Don't bring it. Nolan furiously cried out and tried to shake 9 off his tail, or more like trying to keep his tail on and away from her sharp teeth. Those who watched on didn't know whether to laugh, or help, or just stand back and watch the scene. It was funny with the way Nolan was reacting, but no one wanted to stop 9. Slade was also hesitant to step in. His mate had that killer look in her eyes, but he could see her conflict as she tried hard not to follow the need to kill. He didn't know what to do. Should he step in or let things play out and hope that 9 was strong enough to fight the beast? Slade. Ryan muttered as he watched anxiously as 9 tripped Nolan. Not yet. Slade grumbled back, biting his lip and clenching his fist. On his back, Nolan went into a submissive pose, but that didn't deter 9, as she nipped anywhere she could. She drew blood and soon Nolan was slowly being littered by wounds, both shallow and deep, but not enough to kill him. Slade. Ryan said again, and took a step forward. His eyes wide with fear, so was the rest of the pack who watched on. Their gaze moved to the Alpha and then back to the fight, wondering why he wasn't stepping in. Not yet. Slade internally cursed. Nolan made the mistake to look to his Alpha for help, but by doing so, left his neck bare, which 9 quickly took advantage of and clapped down her jaws, but she did not go for the kill. The crowd gasped, most of the warriors moved to Nolan's aid who sat there frozen and scared. But it was a single command from their Alpha that halted their steps. Slade was a couple of steps by 9. He watched tensely as 9 held Nolan's neck in a tight grip. Her eyes wide, flickering red and white. She was growling possessively, with her lips curled back. Body stiff, as her chest heaved in deep breaths of air. Slade put a lot of faith in 9. He knew she would win the internal battle with the beast. He knew she was stronger than she thought. Because no one else could have controlled the beast, no one like his powerful, courageous mate. 9 dropped Nolan's neck and stepped away from him. Everyone let out the breath that they were holding. Slade's shoulders dropped and he thanked the goddess for such a small miracle. Slade went to check up on 9, while Ryan and the others went to Nolan's side. He was still on his back, tail in between his legs and eyes tightly shut. Nolan. Are you okay? Ryan lightly shook him, his gaze looking over his wound to see if any of them were fatal. The poor Omega pried his eyes opened. My soul has left my body. He whimpered. Everyone eased up and gave him some space. Overhearing his reply, Slade too relaxed. Glad that Nolan had no hard feelings towards 9. Turning towards his mate, he laid a comforting hand on her head, as she breathed in heavily. You did good, 9. He whispered with a proud smile. But I almost killed him. The beast was so close and Slade hushed his panicking mate and ran his hand slowly through her thick, black fur. All that matters is that you overcame the beast and didn't kill Nolan. Even his wounds are not that deep. You should be proud, 9. He said gently smiling, with a little more practice and patience, you will grow even stronger than the beast. He trailed his hands under her strong jaws and lifted her head to eye level. Don't worry. You don't just have me by your side, but everyone else too. Even Nolan. Slade told her and gestured with his head towards everyone behind him. 9 lifted her head to the pack to see them grinning at her. She was speechless when some came over and gave her comforting words and praises, and even being so comfortable enough to give her playful punches, while confessing that they were a little scared. But what mattered was they did not fear her. At that moment, she felt a shift change in her. Her chest felt lighter, her head lifted a little higher. 9 felt at home. No, she was home, she thought as she gazed at every one of those smiling yes, even Nolan though he was still a little shaken up faces, before slowly looking down to her mate who gazed at her with adoration and tenderness. But all it took was one voice to shatter it all. Careful, number 9. Don't forget about me. The beast chuckled darkly. Never. Forget about me. His voice echoed in her head, mocking her of his existence. 9. Slade's voice snapped her out of her trance. He looked up at her with concern etched into his face. I'm Finn. The words halted. 9 took a deep breath, realizing that the only way she could get stronger was to rely on her mate. She couldn't do it alone. She wasn't alone. It was just the beast reminding me that he was still there. That I'm not yet strong enough to control him. She confessed. Slade looked serious as he answered her, it's okay, we're just going to have to make you even stronger. We'll do it together. His reassurance comforted her, and 9 nodded her big head, and let out a wolfish grin. Letting out a grin of his own, Slade was about to say something when suddenly one of the patrolling members came stumbling out of the woods, clutching his abdomen. Blood dripping from the numerous wounds on him. Everyone alert, they moved to the warrior, 2 aided the injured while the Alpha confronted him. Alpha. We couldn't hold them off. There were too many. He shouted before wincing at the slowly healing wound on his torso. The others, he was cut off when abruptly coughing up blood. Slade immediately started giving out orders. I want 10 of our strongest members to head to the patrolling group, bring back the injured. Ryan, you lead the team. He commanded his beater, who wasted no time, and along with the other 10, shifted and headed to the borders. Get this man to the infirmary. I want everyone on lockdown until we deal with the rogues. Nolan stepped up to help the man, while the others headed to the pack house already knowing the protocol. Alpha. A woman's voice shouted through the link, letting everyone know what she said. The rogues got through. There's too many of them for our warriors to hold off. This sent everyone into overdrive. Slade didn't have to command the warriors, as they all shifted and waited for their Alpha and Luna to lead the pack. Others stayed behind to watch over the younger pups, who were not ready to fight. Slade nodded to 9, who moved to his side. Then they were off. It was a formidable sight to see. Led by 2 powerful leaders followed by 30 strong, experienced wolves of all sizes and strengths. Remember, everyone works in teams, no one is to fight alone. Slade ordered through the link. Yes, Alpha. They replied. Slade looked at 9 in the corner of his eye. 9, I don't want you to kill any of the rogues. This stunned her for a second as she snapped her head towards him. But. Slade cut her off, listen, it's best to leave the killing to me. Take them down but don't go for the kill. We don't want to go backwards when you already made progress. Turning away, 9 nodded her head. The red in her eyes that was coming out, slowly receded back. Good, Slade thought. They were nearing the pack house, and could see the women and children running inside while the warriors protected them. Slade was astounded to see so many rogues. He couldn't count them all, but he knew they were outnumbered. But that didn't matter. His pack was strong, and when they worked together, they were undefeatable. 9. Ready? She replied. Just like that, together Alpha and Luna raised their heads high and let out a mighty howl, alerting all rogues to their presence, strengthening the pack's spirits, signaling the start of the real battle. The pack and rogues clashed head-on. Where the rogues worked alone, the pack took down each in pairs. They had no struggle when it came to slashing, biting and tearing. The only one who was struggling was their Luna. With every bite she took, the beast moved a little closer to the surface. With every howl of pain, the beast's growl got a little louder. With every rogue that aimed for her, the beast's bloodlust increased. 9 tried her best to create a balance between trying not to kill the rogues and keep the beast within. But she couldn't. She just wasn't strong enough. Slade noticed her stop moving. She stood still, trying to keep the beast at bay. With her lack of movement, Slade was about to order some of the warriors to protect his mate, but noticed that they did without his command. They surrounded 9, keeping her safe. Reassured that his pack would protect their Luna, Slade moved on to the next rogue. He had to finish them off quickly because this was no random attack. Someone was behind this, and he hoped it wasn't who he thought it was. But then again, only one person had the authority over the rogues. Minutes passed by in a second, and it seemed there was a never-ending horde of rogues. The pack looked they barely made a dent, but they persevered. Lives were at stake. Ryan and his group soon joined in the fray. Things seemed at a deadlock. The more the pack killed, the more rogues came out from the woods. It seemed never-ending. That is, until 9 stepped in. The dangerous aura surrounding her became lethal. Pack and rogue noticed immediately, and all came to a silent agreement to hold off and identify the threat that was bigger than both of them combined. 9's back began to arch, her claws dug deep into the ground. Her head low but not submissive. Eyes opened wide, contrasting against her onyx fur, one white and one red. How nice of you to let me join in, number 9. The beast snickered and their shoulders shook. Everyone was cautious and oblivious to 9's internal conversation she was having. Even her mate could not connect with her. It's not like I wanted you to, but it's better than fighting you off and doing nothing, she told him, and stopped the beast from moving their head to look at the pack members, and aimed it to the rogues. No fun. The beast sounded like he was pouting. It's a shame we can't work together more often, like the good old days in the arena. But then again, I don't like sharing. The beast shook their body and stood tall and proud. You just had to stop killing. The beast slowly walked forward. The pack parted, allowing their suddenly different Luna to stand in front of the rogues. You know, one day I will take over, the beast told her confidently, wolfishly smirking when a few of the weaker rogues, but stronger instincts made them hightail it out of there. I won't let you. 9 snarled. Their lips curled and the growl crawled up her throat. The beast barked out a laugh and then tilted his head to the side, eyes locked onto a particular rogue. Oh, number 9, you make it sound like you have a choice. Their conversation came to an abrupt halt when suddenly out from their pores seeped immense pressure. It weighed heavily down on the rogues like a ton of bricks. The pack watched in complete awe as the rogues struggled to stand. Rooted to the spot, their legs wobbled furiously as the force pushed down on them. I guess for now, I could help you out. Don't you worry, number 9, I'm a patient hunter, the beast told her, his maliciously dark thoughts flittering into her mind and mingling in with her thoughts. 9 wincing at the sharp pain in her head. Here, let me show you a little of what I can do. An unknown build-up increased within 9. She felt her heart pound in her chest, her lungs heaved in fistfuls of air, her muscles contract tensely, making her feel like she was coiled up tightly. She felt like she was suffocating. What are you doing?" she exclaimed, sensing the familiar feeling of fear well up inside of her. Their body began to shake. "Oh, just showing these mutts who controls them. But it's okay, I'll leave your precious pack alone," he said arrogantly to her after reading her frightened thoughts. Like a drop of pitch-black ink in a glass filled with clear water, the beast released his dark energy. It sent a shockwave through the rogues, like a blast of wind coursing straight through to their bones. Their eyes went blank. Their human side disappeared into the depths of their soul. What stood before them was pure, animalistic werewolves. They had no reasoning, but followed only one's command. The beasts. Simultaneously the rogues laid down and bowed their heads in submission and obedience. "Oh, would you look at that?" the beast said, overly chirpy. "And I didn't have to command them to do that. How nice." He chuckled haughtily. "But I guess my fun is over. I'll let you deal with your mutts," he said dismissively to a quiet 9, and sent a silent command to all the rogues to leave the pack's territory. Like a mindless army, they all turned around and fled deep into the woods. Before the beast retreated, he said one more thing. All you have to do is submit fully to me and all this wouldn't be your problem. But you would still kill everyone." 9 whispered accusingly. "Yes, well, I can't help you with that. Unlike you, I follow my instincts. It's how we survive." With that said, the beast returned and 9's eyes went back to white. Hesitantly, she turned around and looked only at Slade. She could feel his strong emotions pulse through her. She didn't notice, as her head slowly dragged down, and her ears fell flat against her head in shame, but it was the pack members nearest to her shuffled to her side and placed their nose under her chin, and lifted her head up. Her mate walked towards her, his chest out and head high. "Be proud, 9. We have a long way to go, but we can't do this without you," he told her gently. A few other members yipped and barked in agreement. Mood lifted, she moved closer to Slade and rubbed her head against his. The pack howled joyously at the mated pair. Slade pulled back and hate to ruin the moment, but he looked 9 seriously in her eyes and spoke only to her through the link. "9, you do realize that Victor cannot know what you can do. We won't know what would happen if he does." She nodded her head in agreement. "I'll try to hide it as much as I can." Well. The mates couldn't catch a break when the voice rang out. All heads snapped to the pack house where a young figure stood, with a conceited smirk on his face. His small number of warriors flanked his side. "What a show. I'm glad I made it in time to see the finale," Alpha Mason said, his eyes glinting wickedly. He internally chuckled. It was about time he got his hands on that exotic she-wolf from the arena, and this time, he wouldn't let damn Slade take her away from him. No. Not this time. She was going to be his. Chapter 22. What are you doing here? Slade snapped and moved to stand in front of Mason. His heavy frown and eyes narrowed showed his aggravation. Now, no need to release your anger out on me," Mason responded with a superior smirk. He shrugged half-heartedly and casually glanced at 9, who already shifted, donned on clothes and was standing just behind Slade. "But if you must know." Mason trailed off, as his eyes roamed over the mysterious she-wolf, who captured his undivided attention since the moment he met her at the arena. As a wolf she was powerful, and now standing in front of him, she was just how he pictured her to be. Exotic, dark, and tempting. Although, Mason slightly narrowed his eyes and his lips curled in distaste at all those wretched scars, and her awfully striking eyes. Thankfully he knew a guy who was a good plastic surgeon. A couple of appointments with him and all those atrocious mutilations would vanish and maybe a change in eye color. Also he would make her grow her hair out. Can't have his future mate looking like a boy. Best to get rid of that scruffy look and make her look more classy. Other than that, Mason was fine with the rest of her body. Long legs, an hourglass curve and her feminine face. She would do nicely. Apparently Alpha Mason was looking too long when Slade stepped in. He grabbed Mason's shirt nonchalant lightly and lifted the pup up with one hand, making sure to humiliate him by dangling his feet off the ground. His guards tried to step in, but Slade's pack was already warning them off with threatening growls. Heavily outnumbered, they could do nothing. Keep your eyes off my mate. Slade spat, his arm bulging as his fists tightened. Alpha Mason struggled to get the brute to let go. His face was turning red from embarrassment and anger when Slade's pack began to snicker. Is this how you treat alphas in your territory? He shouted just as Slade dropped him. Mason stumbled a little, his men caught him before he fell, but he harshly shrugged them off. Mason snarled. I'd appreciate it if you kept your hands off me. He straightened his shirt roughly. Slade let out a scoff and crossed his large arms. What do you want? He asked not too kindly, ignoring the duty to respect and honor all alphas that visit another's territory. His jade eyes glistening with subtle anger and annoyance. Letting out a sharp exhale, Mason straightened his back in order to gain some height. But he was no match for Slade's 6 feet 3 inches stature. I want an alliance. Slade's eyes twitched in irritation at the pup. How dare he enter his territory, without permission and then demands an alliance? That mutt. He should just kick him out, and I mean, you wouldn't want me to contact the council. I'm sure they would like to know the rogue problems you are having and not to mention the way your mate can control them. Mason grinned maliciously at the now livid alpha. 9, having had enough for one day, moved to her mate's side and wrapped her hand around his. She peered up at him, both having a silent conversation with their eyes. Sighing, Slade turned his head slightly to Ryan, who stood to his other side. Prepare rooms for our guests. He spat out the last word and shot a glare at the arrogant alpha. Once they went inside, Slade nodded to Nolan, who went about dealing with the aftermath of the rogues, along with the other warriors, leaving the alpha and Luna to themselves. Turning to his mate, Slade laid his hands on top of 9's shoulders and bore his eyes into hers. Stay away from him, he ordered sternly. 9 nodded her head. I was going to anyway, because I can't kill anyone anymore. She looked to the side distractedly. I wanted him to be my second last kill too. She mumbled sadly. Slade didn't know whether to grin in amusement, or let her do what she wanted. Tough decision. Cupping her face and making her look at him, he leaned down and gave her lips a light kiss. At least make sure you aren't alone with him. He spoke softly and caressed her cheek. Once again nodding, 9 smiled up at him. She lifted her head and gave him another kiss, which Slade was quick to deepen if only his mate didn't pull away. He pouted at her and whined when she turned around and walked away in order to help those who needed it. Slade let her go, but his gaze was looking at her longingly. Too bad he had another nuisance to deal with first. Damn that pup. He growled angrily and stalked inside the house. Yes, thank you, Councilman Xander. Slade cut the call and leaned back in his office chair. Placing his hands on his head and letting out a tired sigh, he checked the clock on his desk and saw it was nearing 6. With the sun sinking down, his pack finally under control and the council contact for the damn alliance, Slade could finally have a moment of peace. The only thing that could top it off was the door opened and 9's head peeked through. She blinked up at him and he grinned. He gestured for her to enter. 9 walked through, closed the door and casually strolled towards him while swinging her hands. Once close, he brought her onto his lap to straddle him. With his hands on her exposed thighs through her jean shorts, the mates gazed silently at each other. Lifting her hand, Nine watched as her finger trailed from his forehead, down his nose to his lips. Thoroughly interested with his lips, Nine rubbed her thumb across it. Slade was humming in delight, but his eyes shone with desire. "When's the mutt and his pack leaving?" she asked, her hand moving back up to tug at Slade's hair that was falling over his eyes. "I'm afraid we have to wait 3 days for the councilman to come. He's the one who mediates the alliance," he told her, and winced lightly when she pulled his hair too hard. Noticing it, Nine ran her hand through his hair and then began to fiddle with other things she could get her hands on. "Why do you need the council?" Slade took a hold of Nine's wandering hands in his large ones and placed a kiss upon both her knuckles. "The council is sort of the middleman in between packs, making sure that all laws pass through them and that packs do not get out of hand, and if so then the council steps in," he explained. "For an alliance, a councilman comes in with a formal contract in order for both parties to abide by the alliance. It's nothing much, but it will take time for him to come since they are busy people." "Right?" Nine mumbled, not fully understanding, but would get used to it eventually. She watched as her hands toyed and played with his large, warm ones. "We just have to survive for 3 days with the mutt and then he'll be on his way home, but until then, we will still work on your control. We'll continue training tomorrow," Slade said and chuckled when Nine tried to arm wrestle with him. He grinned at her concentrated face, but used his other hand to tickle her sides, laughing along with her when she began to giggle, and then burst out laughing. Nine and Slade stayed there in the office, playing and touching and bonding over such simple things. To them it truly felt like they were the only ones there. "Okay, Nine. Let's take it nice and easy," Slade said to her and watched from a distance as she sparred with a nervous, young pup. She was holding back her strength because last time she used her normal power, Nolan went flying. So it was best for her to just use light touches. "That's good. Keep it up," Slade encouraged when she lightly pushed the pup down. He took notice of her eyes, thankful that it stayed mostly white, but there was still the lingering red. Slade felt Ryan slip next to him. "You look like a proud soccer dad, supporting his daughter," he told his alpha bluntly, which resulted in an elbow to the stomach. "What's the situation with the bastard?" Slade grunted. Knowing exactly who he was referring to, Ryan answered, "He's touring the pack, but I made sure Nolan was keeping a close eye on him." Slade snapped his head to Ryan, who looked back innocently. Then both erupted in laughter. They knew that Nolan was doing his job of annoying the hell out of Alpha Mason. He had an uncanny ability to annoy just about anyone. Even the toughest of people cracked under Nolan's irritating pressure. "Oh, here they come." Ryan nodded behind Slade. Both hid their snicker at Mason's fuming expression, along with his pack warriors compared to Nolan's overly happy face. He dressed in his tour guide uniform, consisting of a bright yellow shirt, khaki shorts and a long stick that had a flag at the end of it. All in all he looked like an annoying bugger. "And this, my dear grumpy friends, is the training area. Okay. Let's move on. Isn't this exciting?" Nolan barely made it anywhere close to the other warriors before twisting around and walking back to the pack house. But Alpha Mason had better ideas. He ignored Nolan and walked to Slade, who immediately put on a blank face. "What do you want?" Slade spoke out. Mason shrugged. "Nothing really. Just curious about your training." Slade had nothing to hide, but he didn't particularly want Mason to be close to his mate. Especially when he didn't need any distractions. By that he meant he was probably going to end up in a fist fight if the damn Alpha wouldn't stop looking at his mate. Steeping in front of Mason's view of Nine, he not so subtly snapped, "Get lost, mutt." "I don't think I will," was Mason's arrogant reply. "You know, You should treat me better than this. He smirked and casually walked around a furious Alpha, so he could catch 9 in training. I mean, the councilman is coming in a couple of days, and I would hate for it to slip about your mate being one of Victor's creations. Slade's eyes narrowed dangerously. Mason ignored his intense glare. I wonder what would happen if they found out. He pretended to gasp, oh, would they take her away from you? I'd never let them. Slade snarled loudly. Both alphas were face to face. One slowly losing control and the other smirking. 9 is my mate and under the law but Slade was cut off. But if she was a danger to other packs, then she will be removed. Mason interrupted. His wicked smirk growing as Slade's eyes turned black and signs of him shifting were showing. Are you so blind that you forget that your mate is a monster? Slade viciously roared and shifted on the spot. He lunged at Mason, but another body intervened and shoved his massive wolf form to the side. He quickly got up to snap at whoever did that, but paused when he saw it was 9. She was standing in front of Mason. Her posture was alert but not fully on guard. She carefully walked towards her mate and rubbed her head against his. If I cannot kill him then you can't too. She told him, her eyes staring deep into his. Slade hesitated for a moment. He switched to the damn bastard to see him with that stupid smirk on his face and moved to 9 who sat down in front of him. She gazed upon him intently. But if you do wish to kill him, I would like to join you as well. She said seriously, her eyes slowly glowing red. Just like that Slade calmed down. 9 was improving in her control, and if she killed someone now then they would have moved backwards. Not to mention that killing an alpha without a reason had some serious consequences. Slade could be stripped of his title and separated from 9. Not only because she was his mate, but also because Slade did not mention to the council that 9 was Victor's creation. She was not born a werewolf. She was an abomination, the very thing that the council hated. You were either born a werewolf or bitten. There was no other way. More like there shouldn't be another way. Only the ones Dexter told about the true birth of 9 know what she is. But somehow Alpha Mason found out. After he leaves, Slade had got some serious investigating to do. You're right. Slade said to 9 and used her touch to relax him. 9 began to wag her tail and ears perked. You mean we can kill him? She yipped happily and Slade immediately shook his head. No, no, no. I meant you were right that if you can't kill then I shouldn't either. He confirmed and watched as 9's tail and ears dropped. Oh? She sounded so sad, which made Slade a bit weary. 9 was looking for any reason to kill. He was hoping the beast wasn't messing with her thoughts. He'd have to keep an eye out for that. You want to go for a run? He asked her and watched as she perked up again and dashed for the woods without waiting for him. He internally grinned and turned to his beater. Deal with him, he ordered, referring to an impatiently waiting Mason. Not giving him another second or else Slade would have the need to attack the pup. Slade headed after his mate. A much-needed time with her was way overdue in his opinion. For now, he could forget about everything else and just enjoy being with his mate because Slade knew that something was coming. His instincts never failed him and for once, he wished they did. 9, could you go down to the basement and get the box with all the stuff for donations? Tori asked her friend, who was following her because Slade said that she must not be alone while Mason was around. Was 9's reply. Tori sighed in exasperation. Look, it's just a quick rundown, grab the box and come back up. Knowing you, you'd probably be back in 10 seconds. 9 still looked unsure. She spent the last 2 days avoiding Mason, but he always seemed to pop out of nowhere. She always stayed close to another person because each time he tried to get her alone. It was a shame that she promised Slade that she would not kill anyone. Tori laid a comforting hand on her shoulders. If Mason does something, then all you gotta do it is not kill him. Slade never said anything about attacking his weak ass. Tori said with a cheerful smile, but internally she was hoping that Nine would kick that pups, as since he thought he was the king around here, and kept ordering everyone around like they were his servants. That bastard. Nodding thoughtfully, Nine grinned. You're right, thanks Tori, she said, and then skipped happily towards the staircase that led to the basement. It wasn't even a second when Nine detected Mason, as he followed her down the stairs. She barely paid attention to his presence as she looked for the box, but it was when he moved right behind her that she began to bristle, and her body started to shake unconsciously. You know, you're quite the beauty, he murmured lowly, his breath fanned the back of her neck, making a chill run down her spine. Twisting around, she was eye level with Mason. Step down, she commanded, eyes locking onto her target. Instead of being in fear, Mason was fascinated. He could feel his body hum as the she-wolf emitted her dominance over him. Chuckling, Mason made no move to back away. This may have been their first time alone, but he watched Nine closely. No matter how much she avoided him, he could always observe her from afar. He may not be the perfect alpha, but when it came to observing others and picking upon their behavior, Mason was an expert. His observational skills was what took him to the top. He noticed the last alpha's struggle, but no matter how much he tried to hide it, Mason noticed. It's funny because the old fool was trying to hold his position just so he could hand it down to his son on his 21st birthday. Of course he would have made it if Mason hadn't challenged him, and easily taken him down thanks to his sharp eyes. And right now, Mason was not blind to the subtle shift coming from Nine. From what he had gathered, that thing within her was agitated. Like it wanted to come out. But it seemed as if it was holding back. And then at this moment, it clicked to him. That thing was slowly consuming Nine. But she didn't notice. Not even her mate, Mason thought conceitedly. The process looked slow, but he noticed the subtle red in her eyes, always lurking but never fully taking control. He could use this to his advantage. If he released that thing, then imagine the destruction it would cause. Everything was ready and set, and all Mason had to do was take Nine to his pack. And if that old man was right, then Nine was nave to lying. Another thing that Mason excelled at. All right, I'll back away for now, he said lightly and raised his hands in surrender. I mean, I wouldn't want to awaken that thing inside of you. Nine suddenly jerked forward. She stumbled to a stop, confused to what just happened. Frowning deeply, she looked to the ever-smirking Alpha. What did you do? She snapped, her fists clenched to her side, and she took a threatening step forward. Me? Nothing, Mason replied with false innocence. But you, on the other hand, are slowly losing control, he told her, and watched the internal battle occur within her changing eyes. What are you taking about? Nine finally relented. She didn't like the way he looked at her, like he knew something she didn't. And that was making her angry. You haven't noticed? Mason let out an abrupt laugh and wiped away a fake tear before letting a solemn look fall upon his face. Don't you find your behavior a little strange lately? He asked, and watched as her head tilted down slightly. Maybe. Nine's eyes narrowed. Nodding his head, Mason looked around the basement casually. I can assure you that the training you have going on to ease whatever problem you have will not work. Nine deeply inhaled and held in a growl. She knew that. She knew the sparring would not work, but it at least taught her some control. But it was not enough. She needed Wolfbane. Mason said, as if he read her thoughts. His eyes bored into hers, making her feel uncomfortable. You know, it's not an easy plant to come by. He started and slowly inched his way closer to her. I mean, it is banned for packs to have it, and I'm sure Slade is all about obeying the law, so he definitely would not allow Wolfsbane into his pack. Nine's eyes fell to the ground. She remembered the discussion she had with him. She told him about needing the wolf's bane, but he said for that to be the last resort. He wanted her to use a different method because of the side effects of the plant. He wasn't willing to risk her safety even though it helped her more than it harmed her. But Mason drawled out. He was a foot away from Nine. I do have some and I am willing to give them to you. Her eyes snapped to his in a second. Nine looked at Mason as if she was a hardcore drug addict, and he was dangling the addicting drug right in front of her face. Though it was not Nine he was aiming for, no, she had no need for the plant, but that monster. Now he craved it. Mason chuckled darkly. Guess the old man was right, he thought wickedly. Too bad I left it at my pack. He said sadly, moving away from the she-wolf, who looked like she wanted to say something, but bit her lip to stop herself. I am leaving tomorrow, so maybe you could tag along. He left the question hanging in the air before turning around and walking away. As soon as he was gone, Nine's feet gave out. Dropping to the floor, she was dripping in cold sweat, her throat tightening and she felt herself suffocating. She couldn't swallow or breath, but her mind was running a mile a minute. Though there was only one thought that always repeated itself. Wolf's bane. Nine, there you are. Tori called out when she spotted her hunched over and slowly walking down the hallway with the box in her hands. Catching up to her, Tori took the box and placed it on the ground. She looked at Nine in concern. Hey, you okay? She asked softly and brought Nine into a hug. She didn't like that Mason came out without a scratch, but Nine came out like she saw a ghost or something much worse. Shaking her head and pulling away, she looked at her worried friend. I need Slade. Nine whispered, suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable. Nodding her head and her arms still around her, Tori led Nine to her mate. On the way others noticed their Luna's suddenly blue mood and all asked if she was all right. Tori was the one who answered them, all the while briskly walking towards Slade's office. Finally reaching it, Tori let Nine slip in and closed the door behind her. She paused with her hand still on the knob and a deep frown on her face. There was something different about Nine, and it was not what happened moments ago. She couldn't put her finger on it, but Nine was slowly acting like someone entirely different. Tori hoped she was wrong and that it was just a phase for Nine. But as she turned around and left, there was that lingering feeling in the back of her head that things were about to change. Nine. What's wrong? Slade stood up from his seat and walked straight to his mate and engulfed her in a hug. Laying her head on his shoulder, she whispered, I feel strange. Slade tried to keep himself from stiffening. Is it the beast? He asked and rubbed her back soothingly. He tightened his grip when she nodded slightly. Nine lifted her head and looked at her mate with a scared expression. I don't know what's happening, B, but I think I'm changing. She told him, her fear shone through her eyes. Slade didn't know how to reassure her. He felt it too. Nine was not acting like her normal self. It was also affecting the mark. He could feel something strange whenever Nine would act differently. It always put him on edge. Placing his forehead on hers, he sighed. I don't know what to say, Nine. He said to her truthfully. All we can do is try to find a way to dim down the beast. Biting her lip, Nine hesitated to ask but did it anyway. Maybe wolf's ba no. Slade pulled back, now his eyes showed his fear. No? He said more softly. We'll keep that last. You know the effects of it, Nine, and I don't want it to happen to you. He told her gently and laid a kiss on her temple. The silence was broken by the sound of Slade's phone ringing. Letting go of Nine, he moved to his desk and answered the call. Nine waited patiently until he finished before asking who it was. It was Councilman Xander. It turns out he can only make it next week. Slade moved back to 9 and brought her in his arms, smiling down at her. But the good news is, Alpha Mason doesn't have to stay here any longer. He can go back to his pack. Slade barely picked up 9's tension before she forced herself to relax. I guess you should go tell Mason. She mumbled into his chest. Humming in agreement, Slade stepped away and took a hold of her hand. Let's go get rid of him together. 9 laughed with him, as they both exited the office and headed to the dining room where he and his warriors were having dinner. Mason, easily taking notice of the pair's presence, conceitedly grinned up at them. Ah, so glad you could join us. I was starting to think you hated me or something. Mason laughed at his own joke, along with his pack. Slade, finding no amusement in it, got straight to the point. You can leave my territory now. The council can only come next week, so I'll see you then. He grumbled out. Mason ceased his laughter but not his smirk. Oh well, I guess our alliance will wait until then. I'll have Ryan get your cars ready. Slade muttered but was stopped by the Alpha. Come now, Slade. It's getting late. We'll stay one more night and leave bright and early tomorrow. He said, staring at 9 in particular, as if he was silently inviting her to join him. 9 looked away from him only to shake Slade's arm lightly when she knew he was getting angry. Fine. Slade said through gritted teeth and walked away with 9 trailing with him. The pair headed for their room, thinking it was best for them to retire early. Any second more in Mason's presence would not end well for either of them. When it was time for bed, 9 completed her daily routine before turning off the lights and joining her mate on the bed. She curled up under the covers, watching her mate while he stayed on his back and stared at the ceiling. Slade exhaled through his mouth and moved to his side. His arms wrapped around his mate and brought her closer to him. Eyes feeling heavy, he breathed in 9's scent and kissed her head. Don't worry 9, we'll find a way. I promise. He said, eyes slowly closing. He felt a peck on his cheek and he smiled. Night, Slade. 9 whispered. He tightened his hold. Night, my queen. 9 awoke to a sudden pain in her left leg. She jerked awake and opened her eyes, but what she saw was her worst nightmare. No, 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 no. She was stuck on repeat. 9 began to panic. Please. Stop. She begged the beast, who only chuckled at her. She could only watch as her body was being controlled by the beast. 9 was no longer in control of herself. She was pushed back inside that internal abyss that the beast resided in, but now it was her turn. She didn't think the beast could take over her human form. It shouldn't be possible. He was getting stronger while she was too weak. She was helpless as she watched through her eyes as she slowly walked down the stairs. It seemed so foreign to her. To see herself but not be in control. Where are you going? She yelled out into the darkness. Eyes wide with fright when her body moved to open the front door. No need to be scared 9. I'm going to go have my fun. The beast responded. Please don't. She pleaded and tried hard to gain control, but she was too far in. Her chest heaved as she saw Mason, who was up and ready to leave. He turned to her and smirked. So glad you could join us. He said and opened the back door for her. The beast easily maneuvering her body inside the car. No, please don't do this. Anything but this. 9 shook her head, tears sprung to her eyes. She couldn't go through this again. Don't worry. The beast grinned. You won't be seeing a thing. Just leave it all to me. No. Wait. Please. You can't do this. 9 cried out just as the darkness consumed her. The light began to fade and slowly she began to fall. Deep into the abyss. Be part of our werewolf community. Subscribe.